Hello, you gorgeous lot, it's Gran here, with another episode of Vintage Story from the Rusty Gear server. Now then, we're just coming up to spring, and I've worked the whole of the winter on Wintertown, building various cottages and having various adventures. I've also had quite a few visitors, so I've got a lot of footage to show you. I couldn't fit it all into this episode, so the next episode will be the other half of this winter. But I think you'll be quite excited about my progress. I am, anyway. We have a few adventures, and I go on a few trips for some resource gathering. I have a few problems with my chickens. I do something really daft with my tent, and have to take some time to rectify it. And I have several visitors and lots of presents. So I'm quite excited about this episode and the next one as well. I hope you will be. So we start way back in September, when it was still quite warm and still quite clear. And I worked well into each night because I had my night watchers to help protect me. And my eyes and ears, of course. So finishing off the cottages and attention to detail was quite important. And also the breaks I got from the various visitors that I had. And that was an angel belt, so that could only be Sid. I remember in the last episode mentioning Sid's new tent, but I don't think I showed it yet. I could not believe it. It was fantastic. It really was. It was just like the real thing. And I laughed, oh my goodness me. That was awesome. And he'd even done a dialect. A little bit later, I got a visit from a Zungu who was thinking of building in the area.
Good grief.
So it took me a long time to get established. But if you follow me over here, I'll show you where my base is, up on this hill here. Be careful of these pillars. There's bear pits at the bottom of there. And some of them have things in them. I don't know if there's anything in that one.
Oh.
But I've caught a few bears in there. So if you come up these main stairs, this will take you inside my base. My base really is the tent, but I've got it in my inventory at the moment. But we'll go up and put it down, and then you can see it. I've got a few traders on either side here, just 4. I'm not greedy.
Nice.
I could have more. they're
a few
very
tenants,
handy.
right?
Yeah. And then this is my little base that's underneath my tent. And I just extended this last week, actually. So this is all my storage in here. And
Sweet.
There's going to be... Most of this is going to be full of ruins stuff. And that's going to be for the castle build. So that's why I wanted it so big, really. And then I've got my mechanics there. Yeah.
Mechanical power here.
Yeah. I just have to add a gear to each of these, and they will each work. So...
Yep.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
And then through here, I've got my, this is my brewery, and where I make my cheese.
A boiler, condenser. This is where the booze gets made.
This is where the booze gets made, and my cheese as well, and my leather. My leather gets, this is where all my my barrels are. So whatever.
The cheese and wine, living the high life.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So that's that. So if you come through here, I'll take you up top. And there we go. Right, so if you stand outside a gate, I'll put my tent down and then you can come back in. So,
right.
There we go.
Boom. I need to... Oh! Oh, dear.
Oh, what happened?
I was going to say I need to get me one of these because they're so cool,
What?
But every time I see one of the other players using them...
That has never happened before. Let me just...
Oh, dear.
Let me just...
I jinxed it! I apologize.
What happened there? I don't get that. That is... Wow. That has never happened. I don't know what's happened there. I can see during editing I was totally responsible for that. I'd put down my tent and then I left my tent bag in my hand when I opened the door. And it just did what tent bags do. Yeah, so the top of this hill is where I've made a little homestead. I've got some stables here with my elk in. And I got a spare elk here.
Norbert.
So if you want, if you haven't got an elk, you could have this one if you wanted, because I only wanted one. So I tried to describe where all the bits go, but Azungu got it himself. That's it, you've got it. So now if you climb on the saddle, you can use, that's it, and you can come out and can have a run round. I'm going to get Norbert. Come on,
Riding
Norbert.
lessons with Rand. Do I need a... I bet I probably better pay for this lesson, right? That's what is it, like 60 gears per hour, right? That's a fair rate.
Oh yeah, that'll do mate. I had a spare snaffle as well. It wasn't the type that I like to use, so I wasn't going to use it. So that was up for grabs as well.
I'm kind of a combat junkie, so this works perfect. So I can ride past someone while shooting a bow and arrow at them, instead of having the cursor locked to the direction of movement.
Nice. So off he went to do a bit of exploring, and while he did, I tried to put my tent back together again, which was a bit tricky really, because it was quite a while since that I'd made it. But Sid appeared, good old Sid, and he helped me transfer all the bits over. But he'd actually come to give me some more stuff. He'd obviously been ruin raided and had some stuff that was spare. So he offered me the chance to rummage through his drawers, and I could have anything I could use. That was a bit fab, I thought. But that tent, honestly, I just couldn't believe it. It was so small as well, but of course with the decorative chests, each of the panels on the side could become a chest. So it was a lot bigger than you actually thought. I had a lot more space. He had run out of a few decorative chests though, but I had a few spare. So off I went to get some, and I was really chuffed that I could give something back for all the things that he kept giving me. There was tavern tables, and you know, next on my agenda, after this episode of course, is building a tavern. This one, and this one. There we go. And of course, he wasted no time in incorporating those into his TARDIS. Well, I had to get on and do more building. Well, more resource gathering to be precise. Although this was more resource making. Wattle and daub. It took time to make, so I only made it when I was actually going to use it. And then Sid said he'd found a village that I could actually demolish for the resources in it, so off I went through the West Translocator to find it. There's obviously a tent being pitched here before, so I thought I'd pitch my tent as well. I also had a beacon that I was going to pitch outside the tent, so wherever I went, I could actually get back to the Translocators quite easily. It didn't take long using the waypoint manager with the beacon on it. I made a straight beeline. There was also one of those staircase ruins. Thought might have to have that later, because I was using a lot of granite. I needed a lot of granite, and I'd have to collect a lot of granite as well. This looked super, super cool. I kept hearing what I thought was a spawner. So I took no chances at all, and I used one of my night watchers and put it as close to where I was hearing the noise as possible. I think it was a good thing really, because I'm almost sure it was a spawner, but nothing was spawning, so I think it was working. So I slept, and the next morning I started ripping this village to pieces. I took everything that I thought might be useful. In this first house, there was also some loot as well. In fact, I think the village was untouched by Sid. It looked fab. There's lots of debris as well, which I'd be using in the build. I grabbed everything. Absolutely everything. And the thatch as well went. Because it was all stuff I was using. So it'd come in very, very handy. And when I was stuffed, I was back at the tent to unpack. And then on to the next one. The next one was even better. Look at this. It had all sorts in it. Well, I was having that as well. Everything. I tried to get to the bottom of this noise I was hearing. It sounded like there was a spawner, but I could not find it. This one had some muddy gravel in the middle, and I was wanting that. Because all the pathing in Wintertown needed some muddy gravel on either side. But even when I'd got all that, there was no sign of a spawner. So I had no idea what that noise was. But nothing was spawning, so I was quite happy to carry on to the next house. Oh, all this stuff. And it was all mine. There was a church as well, with pews and lecterns and so much aged wood. When I'd done, I picked up my night watcher, and on the way back to the tent saw some peat, and I could do with a bit of peat, so I collected a bit of peat. That was a nice bit of peat I collected, I must say. And then it was time to get home. So I collected my tent, and on my last look in the village, I saw a bit that I hadn't collected. So I had to go back and collect it. And then I zipped off to the translocators, picked up my beacon, and was on my way home before I knew it. That was awesome. It really was. Oh, it was always nice to get back to spawn. Well, the village, because spawn actually wasn't here. Spawn is where Sid's house is now. And then on the translocator that'd take me home. I did a lot of zipping about these days with my runes and my translocators, but I was quite glad to get back to my build site. I had a lot to do. It was September and winter was coming. I had quite a few more houses to build and to extend the path to where the town square was supposed to start, because on the other side of the town square is where I'd start building the castle walls, so we weren't a million miles away from starting on the castle. I decided the town needed another row of terraced cottages, and I did them more or less exactly as I'd done the first lot, but they were on different levels. I thought that might be a challenge, but actually it wasn't too bad. And it was a way of making them a little bit different from the first lot that I'd built. I used cobblestone for the foundations. Well, they weren't really foundations, they were the first layer of brick that you could see. And I was going to use rammed earth for the upper part of it. But getting the first layer correct was pretty important. Otherwise, I'd be doing a lot of unpicking. So a lot of counting was on the cards for this. But once I got that right, it was just about separating each of the houses. And they were 5 by 5, so that was quite easy. And then there was a separating wall in between. And where a house was on a different level to the next house, I actually made that house a little bit higher up, so it's a little bit easier when it came to putting on the roof. I'd also decided that these smaller cottages would have cellars, so I'd need quite a bit of cobblestone for that, because they were going to be lined with cobblestone, maybe with the occasional ashlar block put in as well, just to give it a little variety and just to texturise it a little bit. I did notice that I was over some red clay here, but I had got so much red clay on this site, I didn't really need to bother about digging that out. I had to keep a little eye on my wheel, because in this area it was temporarily unstable and my wheel was going anti-clockwise most of the time. But it wasn't going fast, and it did allow me to do quite a bit of building before I started getting spooky noises. And when I got the spooky noises, I ignored them for a little bit before they got on my nerves, and I'd have to go back up to the tent to restore my wheel. And it wasn't too much of an intrusion, because I tended to do things around the homestead while I was waiting for my wheel to restore. So I got things done. And once the roof was on, I could decorate the outside. I kept comparing with the first lot I'd made, because I didn't want it to be too different. And then I had another visit from Sid, with lots more lovely loot that he'd collected from the ruins that he'd come across. It was fantastic. My worries about how I would decorate this castle, because it was going to be a big one, were getting less and less, I must say. And there was a chest full of graves and tapestries. That was going to be awesome, because I needed to build a graveyard. I must say, I was very grateful for Sid and Punk's donations. But I had to get back to building, because we were already halfway through the season, and all the support beamage on the cottages took some time to do. They were quite fiddly, especially on the end bits, but I felt the effects were really worth it. I kept looking out for luxury traders, because they were the only ones that would sell the omok pieces, but they only sold one lot at a time, which was a bit stingy if you ask me. There was nothing else I wanted. I was nearly there. I only needed another 10 omok pieces before I could make my angel belt. Those 2 gold plates I found in that treasure chest in the last episode went towards making 2 more night watches. 2 of those, and 1, 2 of those, 1, 2. So that I had 4 night watches altogether, and that would stave off a lot of those wolves and bears. They were still around though, I did see them. I was making fairly regular trips now to the quarry that I'd made in the desert, and those trips would only get more and more frequent as I started building the castle. But we weren't there quite yet, so it wasn't too bad. I decided that those cottages that were made of cobblestone in any part of them would get a wall instead of the wattle fences. I just wanted to change it up a little bit, because there was a lot of wattle fences going up, and I thought it would add a little bit more variety. This was one such house. I'd already put some dry stone walling on, but I'd run out until I'd come back from my quarry visit. And then it just needed a gate. When checking the size of the gardens on my first lot of terraced cottages, I had a thought that I might not have left enough room on this side. Well, it was going to be skinny, but it was doable. And one of them needed a step up, so I made a little step for that out of the cobblestone. I didn't want it to be too fancy, So I left it as plain as I could really, but wanting it neat and tidy. I think it worked okay. The garden was very small, but then not everybody likes a garden. I think that will be fine. So it was finishing the wattle fencing, putting in the gates and the pathway, and making sure it was sensible, joining up with the central pathway down the middle. There, I think. Let's have a look. And then you can come straight in from... Yeah, that's alright. Okay. You want a gate. Is that wattle fencing or a gate? And I needed to assess how many more houses I'd need before I could actually start on the town square. We weren't far away now. I definitely needed another house in this area here. And we'd got quite a few rammed earth ones. And some with some cobblestone. So I think we needed a wattle and daub one here. So I set about building a wattle and daub little cottage on this area here. I'd made this one on 2 levels and it was coming together really, really nicely. I needed to decide where the windows were going. But I was finding the smaller the cottage was, the harder it was to make a decision about where to put everything. I kept having to compare and contrast. I started putting the cellars in the terraced houses. They were only small, so they needed a little bit of space for, well, anything you'd put in a cellar really. And I need to do a little bit of chiselling to hide the stone that was the chimney above. But I think they looked okay, and they looked better when I decorated them. Well, winter was really here. Snow was everywhere, and one of the days I went down to the coop, I found all the chickens had gone except one. I went out straight away with some cages to try and find some to put them in, but I could only find 2 hens. I couldn't find a rooster at all. I had no idea how the other hens had either got out or been caught by something. There were some eggs about, but most of them weren't fertilised. That was no good. But then I found that there were 3 in this box here that were fertilised. All I could do was cross my fingers and hope that we'd get a rooster when they hatched. I really thought these hens were safe. Back in Wintertown, the second row of terraced cottages were complete. And the other cobblestone cottage was almost complete. I'd put in the fireplace, put in the windows, and in the front I'd done half windows. I kept wondering where I could add some more support beamage. I had to be careful though, because I didn't want to overdo it, but I did want to make each individual cottage quite different from the next one, and the outdoor decoration added to that. But you did have to be careful, because you didn't want your support beams to touch anything chiselled, otherwise, well, it could cause a bit of a dilemma. So I was very careful where I added them. This one got a dry stone wall around its garden because it was all made of cobblestone. The next house was a wattle and daub house, and I built that behind that last row of terraced cottages that I'd built because I wanted to push out the outer boundary on this side. I really wanted it to look like there was a collection of houses and not just a row. And although I said I wasn't going to do any fancy chiselling, I just thought I'd do just a tiny little bit. Just a bit, you know? I couldn't resist. It wasn't very fancy though. But I really liked the effect when it was done. That's probably as fancy as it's going to get in these cottages in Wintertown. I did find later that in this cottage I would have to take the floor up a little bit higher on this bedroom bit because I'd put it half a block down. So I wouldn't be able to place a bed on there, or anything else for that matter. Don't know why I didn't think of that at the time. And that was another building finished. I loved that the snow was here, so you could see the effect of the chimneys and the smoke and the snow. It looked so cosy. I was trying to make sure that there was a path leading in between the houses. Apart from the main path though, these needed to be just 1 block wide. And I wanted to make sure that underneath the pathing blocks were other pathing blocks, because I really find it irritating to find earth underneath a pathing block. Because you could see it, you could see the line underneath it. So the dirt had to go and be replaced by pathing blocks underneath the slabs. I might miss 1 or 2, but that's how I would like them all. So if I see any, I'd be changing them. Could fit in another house here. I needed to keep an eye on these chickens, and when I went next time those eggs had hatched and we got some chicks. That was awesome. I needed to keep them well fed, and I needed to find out the reason why they'd disappeared. I would ask Sid when he was on next time, see if he had any tips for me. Now I just needed to hope that one of these chicks would grow up to be a rooster. I wanted to have a go at creating a sconce. It took quite some time did this, so this bit is speeded up so that you can see the process. I'd looked up what sconces looked like, and particularly put medieval sconce in the search term, and it seemed like they were like, well, they were like torches at an angle. Well, I couldn't be that specific, but I wanted it to look something medieval. I also wanted it to look a little bit like the braziers so that they fitted. I must say it looks more like a spooky hand than a sconce to me, but I want to try it against a wall. So I went into the barrel room, because that's the only place I had a bit of spare wall. In here there was lots of overlays and support beams, so that wouldn't do at all. I needed my chisel to change the perspective, but once it was against the wall, it wasn't as bad as I thought. I think I probably needed to, well, elongate the fingers, if you like. And I think it'd look a lot better with the embers in it. So I persisted, because I thought it might look okay. And once I'd done that, it did look better. So I filled in with the embers, making it lighter in the middle. But I wanted to be careful not to see that lighter glow from the outside. So I built up the embers a little bit around the outside, or the outside of the inside, if you know what I mean. And I went to find a house to try it on. I was wondering what it would look like just sat there, if I could get it in between those two support beams, which wasn't always possible. But they were a little bit contrary, and sometimes you could, like that. So from up here I could see the glow from the middle, so we'd have to change that. Well, we'd have to go back at night time to see how bright it made it. It needed to be bright enough. The last house I did also got an upper bedroom bit, and I added the fancy railing as well. I couldn't resist. And it was ever so quick with a bit of pantographing. And I had to make sure that all the cottages in Wintertown that had an upper bedding bit and a railing had that little fancy bit. Well, it was the only frilly bit I was going to get to do in the town itself, and I just couldn't resist. And I did like it. Well, it was time to check the chickens. And I was lucky enough to have gotten a rooster. So I made sure that they were well fed. Well, it was a cockerel, but it would grow up to be a rooster. Well, the time had come to work on the town square. This was particularly exciting, not particularly because it was the town square, but it was another step towards starting to build the castle. The first thing I needed to do was to extend the main road through the middle of the town all the way down to where the square was going to be. I seem to be getting cold more often. I mean, it was the 4th of December, so I should expect that, but I had my winter woolies on. But when I checked, they weren't in very good condition. So off I went to repair them in the hope that I'd be able to work for longer without before freezing. I had plenty of flax twine, so that wasn't a problem. And I lit a fire and got myself warmed up while I repaired my clothing. quite in bad condition. I can't remember when I last checked, to be honest. And I hope that little repair session would keep me warm for longer. So I went back to finishing off the pathing, but it was soon evident that I really needed to build another house. There was quite a big space here, and yeah, it really needed I would have to build some more anyway, but I hoped to do the square before I built any more. But I did want to make sure that the square was in the right place, so I needed to do a little bit more building. So I got on with doing that. Then I was able to ask Sid about my chickens, and apparently if you have any dirt or grass blocks in the area, it can spawn a fox. Well, that meant that I couldn't have any grass or any flowers or anything in the chicken coop, and that I would have to just change the whole of the floor. Well, I changed it all. I had various levels of dirty gravel. I had some clear dirty gravel, some wet, and some stony. And I also had some cob in there. I did leave some dirt in, but with some wooden paths on top. But I decided I didn't want to take the chance, and I took out the dirt underneath and replaced it with more of the dirty gravel. And it looked quite good actually. So I finished that last house I started, and now it was time to decide on how big to have this town square. It needed to be fairly big, because at the top end of it would be the gates of the castle. Once I'd cleared all the grass, I would then have to dig all this up. There was a wolf. I could have done with taking my night watches a bit further forward at that point. I hadn't moved them in quite a while. And when I looked, I could see that there was a wolf. Right there. As long as it stayed over there, that was okay. We'd have to keep an eye in that direction. But for the time being, I got on with the square. I needed to get an overhead view to see what it looked like in comparison to the rest of the village. So I went into an area of safety and I had a look at the map. I needed the houses to come round both sides of the square, and I think I was quite happy with the size. When I got back to the square, that wolf had just travelled a little bit further towards the square. I thought it might be aching for a fight. But it was a bit too close for comfort. Now, I came a bit of a cropper the last time I had words with a wolf, so I needed to be a bit more careful this time. Well, thank goodness that turned tail and ran. I was making the square out of granite because that was the block of choice for the whole build, and I wanted this to be in keeping with the rest of the build. So I started off with granite ashlar blocks. and I added some texture with cobblestone and later gravel. I quite like the look of that. I think it set the tone for the rest of the build. And I like the size. It looked like that would be more than adequate. Just to make sure, I wanted to get a higher perspective. Yeah, I really liked that. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with the edges at this moment in time, but I'm sure I would figure it out when the time came. But I did feel on the front side at least I should have an easy step up. And that is where the well would go, because Wintertown has a well at the centre of its town square. The next time I was on the server, it was halfway through January. Didn't make any difference to the weather or the temperature, but I got a visit from Punk with an eye patch and a big chest full of goodies from which I could take my pick. That was awesome. He had some awesome stuff. And I wasted no time in grabbing as much as I could. So that's about it for this episode. In the next episode, I'm going to be building the town tavern, which is situated alongside the town square. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.